Okay, before the ad break, Don, by the looks of it, nearly gave himself some kind of major coronary event trying to hustle KTM's 890 SMT around a go-kart track that is normally used for supermoto racing. Given the SM in the bike's designation, this undoubtedly seemed like an entirely reasonable proposition. However, there is also another letter hanging around, almost apologetically, at the end of the model's designation, and that stands for something much less radical than the sideways skidding, lent over wheeling SM. That letter is T, as in T for touring. Supermoto and touring, diametrically opposed purposes for a motorbike. They basically represent two extremes of motorcycle design and engineering. A supermoto bike, after all, is at its heart a subtly modified dirt bike, and so it's incredibly light, with wider, smaller rims, with fatter, stickier rubber on them, a bit more stiffness in the suspension if it is, as is often the case in SA, not required to deal with any dirt, and what else? Possibly some upgraded brakes. These things are usually 450cc or below if destined for a life on the track, but if you want a taste of similarly supermoto razor sharp handling and almost neurotically twitchy levels of agility on the road, then you'll need KTM's 690 SMC-R, or indeed the equivalent model from sister brands Husqvarna or GasGas. Touring bikes, on the other hand, really don't care about weight, and even sport tourers aren't obsessed with this factor. They can't afford to be, because there's more important stuff to get right before that, namely rider and passenger comfort over long distances, a chassis that lets you cover that distance with minimum rider effort, which then has enough sportiness left in its armoury for the mountain passes that you're undoubtedly on your way to ride. Same requirements for an engine that must be both tractable and exciting to exploit. In other words, it needs to enjoy being thrashed to the red line, at least occasionally. There should also be a healthy dollop of the latest technology to take care of you, both when droning along the highways and then when you start getting carried away, as you inevitably will, in those mountains. Ideally, you'll also need a dedicated luggage system, and these days you simply have to have a comprehensive array of accessories, add-ons and upgraded parts for those owners intent on making their new sport touring weapon that bit more bespoke. You may have seen my original launch report on the SMT after my ride in Sardinia and then up through the south of France. In short, after a decent helping of mad mountain riding in the company of some very fast, super skillful, world-class riders, I had the opportunity to complement that with an equally generous helping of touring kilometres, and I came away from that couple of weeks hugely impressed, though it was tinged with the unavoidable feeling that the SMT has been shortchanged ever so slightly. I say slightly shortchanged because brilliance beckoned, and although this 105 horsepower, 100 newton meters parallel twin is great for grunting out of tight mountain hairpins and chugging you from point A to point B in more mundane situations, I can't help but feel just a teeny weeny bit of disappointment that KTM didn't give us this same engine, same gruntiness, but sprinkled with the magic fairy dust of another 10 horsepower or so at the top end. Not impossible, or even difficult, given it's the sort of peak horsepower that's on offer in the standard 890 Duke. Faster, more sweeping roads where you can really start to flow in, say, third and fourth gears, occasionally hooking fifth. This is where another 1,000 RPM or more with a zesty, willing rush to the red line would really have made the difference between what is a good engine and one that would have been memorable, outstanding even in this sport touring role. But how does KTM's marketing refer to these hugely enjoyable and incontrovertibly exciting challenges? Well,
Since it has touring in the name, we thought about showing you flowing coastal roads bathed in sunlight. But it's a KTM, and it also has Supermoto in its name, so we put it where it belongs. KTM 890 SMT put an end to boring sports touring.
So apparently those of us who like higher speed corners, bigger, longer lean angles and the chance to enjoy an engine's top end in harmony with its chassis, we're a bit dull, ordinary, perhaps missing the point a bit. Yes, I know they're poking fun and it's all in good spirits, but this is from a manufacturer after all who dresses up an adventure bike and pretends that it's just a radical supermoto and not a big, weighty old sport tourer. I think this change of focus allows them to ignore the elephant in the room, that in a very competitive class, we're talking about a hugely hyped KTM that in terms of engine performance is, well, nothing very special. But make no mistake, the SMT is still a bike that it's very easy to fall for, properly entertaining and complemented by a chassis with some sublime suspension and, amazingly for a KTM, an excellent seat and wind protection that is way more effective, at least for a sloucher like me, than the piddly little screen might at first suggest. My bike has the standard seat. There are a couple of alternatives featuring a splash of orange colouring, one with the same type of step up for the pillion and another that gives it a more traditional one-piece off-road look. Unless you want the extra pizzazz of the colour for about 4,000 Rand or 200 euros, the standard version is more than good enough. In fact, it's easily the most comfortable arse cradle I've ever come across on a KTM. The riding position as a whole really works for me as well. Plenty of room for legs and upper body, upright, roomy position overall. It doesn't pull you too close to the handlebar, and the wind protection is okay for me up to a steady 140 k's an hour or so. But then I have to admit I am something of a hunchback sloucher on a bike, so although I'm 1.82 m, I probably only have as much head and neck stuck up in the wind as someone at least 4 or 5 centimetres shorter. Will taller riders want to have a look at improving wind protection? Probably, yes. And KTM's Power Parts catalogue has them covered with 3 options. 2 what look like slightly smoked replacements, one of which is noticeably taller, and a kind of visor extension to add to the existing standard screen. I'll try my luck with KTM, see if I can't get to give one of these a go for about, I think they go for about 2,500 Rand or so. The TFT screen is clear, and the whole user interface is better than ever. Definitely easier to use and more logical in the way it presents its information. I particularly enjoy the turn-by-turn navigation. As a user of Google Maps normally, just via earphones, because I struggle to read most sat-nav units, and I don't like the clutter of extra handlebar-mounted gadgets. I appreciate the clarity and simplicity of this approach. I paired the KTM app, and so I can also listen to the voice commands as well as see the little arrows about which way to go. So overall, works a treat when it works. It's annoyingly inconsistent though, often not wanting to start a journey, often dropping the voice commands for no apparent reason, and setting a route on the map in the app is not very easy either. The map itself is poorly laid out in terms of showing major and minor roads, the overall orientation and a few other niggles. Like I say, when it works, it's useful, but it irritates with its temperamental behaviour far too often to be a genuinely reliable sole navigation tool. While we're on the rider interface, the handlebar switchgear is generally pretty good, nice quality, but the 4 direction buttons for finding and changing the menu items, especially on the move, can also be a touch on the not quite right side of things. They just don't stand proud enough of their housing, and there's not enough of a physical feedback to let you know when you've made a positive input. So even with thin summer gloves. You can't, despite knowing which buttons to press and how many times, you can't make a change without checking the screen to make sure you've done the job properly. Use thicker gloves on a cold morning, as I did a few times up in the mountains, and you even have to visually confirm your finger or thumb is over or even near the right button. Again, it's an improved interface generally, but you just feel with a bit more attention to detail, it could be class leading rather than just okay. What did really impress me was the luggage system. The touring set fitted to my bike is plastic and not metal, but still feels like a quality, sturdy set of kit. Lockable, obviously, and very easy to take on and off, and I reckon plenty roomy enough as well. I've got the panniers and top box, and I stuffed all my launch riding kit and socialising kit in them after the Sardinia ride, and then trudged across the island for a couple of days and into France through some serious downpours. So many hours of respectably heavy rain, and there were no leaks whatsoever. With all the luggage off, the bike's already, how can I put it, quirky looks aren't particularly worsened by having the brackets there for the cases either. Cost for the full set, including those brackets, is a not inconsequential 1,400 euros or so, or very nearly 30,000 rand. Oh, and make sure to budget another 1,000 rand or so for the backrest cushions, so your passenger's spine isn't permanently damaged by the thoughtfully placed ridge in the uncushioned standard top box. Other handy features for touring include the easily reached rear shock preload adjustment, great for a quick twiddle for a full pannier load or when you've got a passenger. You'll fiddle with the front end less frequently because it's just so beautifully set up as standard, but the manual wing nut type adjuster things are a nice touch. Yeah, they've probably got a proper name, but I've suddenly drawn a blank, but I'm sure you know what I mean. Listening to myself as I rabbit on and on in an attempt to give you a real idea of this bike's sport touring abilities, I feel like I may be coming across as too negative. That's definitely not the impression I want to leave you with, because this is quite simply a superb bike in the sport touring role. It's just that, unfortunately, I think the SMT might ultimately fall victim to its own ready-to-race hardcore marketing approach. Anyone with 250 to over 300,000 rand to spend on a sport tourer like this, and you'll easily spend that much if you spec it up with full electronics and luggage, wants a bike that can boogie with the best of them in the twisties, which the SMT most definitely does, but they also want a bike that does the more humdrum touring stuff just as impressively, which it also does, but with a relentless, though admittedly spectacular, marketing campaign that obsessively focuses in on, well, stunt riding, wheel smoking, skidding and burnouts and crossed up wheelies, all on public roads, performed by genuinely world-class racers and trick riders. It feels like they really don't care about the T in this bike's name, only the S and M. And let's face it, 99.9% of customers will not ride like this, ever. And if they tried to do so, they would die. Yes, it's undeniably aspirational, inspirational and glamorous and enjoyable to watch, but it has nothing to do with what the bike is really all about. The Supermoto connection is a thin veneer of orange hype, as Don so ably demonstrated, on a bike that is undoubtedly a fantastically accomplished sport tourer. I understand KTM's reputation demands this kind of approach, but I'm not sure the relentless repetition of the same extreme riding skills is going to endear it to mere sport touring mortals like myself who fancy an entertaining road bike that can take them touring, but with a proper dose of sporting stuff when required. If I was to buy a Supermoto style tourer based on how the bike is marketed, I have a feeling I might want to wait and see what Husqvarna could come up with based on the same ingredients. I have no idea if they have anything in the pipeline, but I love Norden's different, better looking, slightly more grown up and, dare I say, classy approach to adventure, so maybe they could do the same thing with the SMT as a starting point. I hope this extended discussion has given you a more detailed, nuanced view of KTM's 890 SMT. I think that combined with Don's somewhat hopeful visit to a go-kart track and my original launch report that you can still find on our Bike Show YouTube channel, there's plenty to digest from us on this new model. But preparing my thoughts on this touring part of the 890's talents, I've realised that given how much information and opinion we've shared, there's actually some important and relevant further detail regarding pricing, optional extras, and perhaps most pertinent of all, a comparison with the SMT's competition to consider. You might not think that there's much of that, but if you loosen the parameters of your search just a little and consider the range of alternatives from which you might choose your next helping of sporting touriness, then you'll discover that this 900 to 1000cc-ish category is actually stuffed with viable destinations for your dosh. Once again, our YouTube channel comes to the rescue here, giving us the extra time and freedom of speech that national TV can't. So please head over there and join in with what I'm sure will be a lively comments discussion about what I rate as the best of what is a currently crowded and extremely capable field of sport tourers.